Good evening. It's Joyful Hermit here. Well, I've been messed with by the devil again. I'm just going to freelance it and talk about it. It's been an ordeal since about yesterday morning around 11, and it started from, well, different things going on, but I had inquired about the process for my request for canonical approval. And because I hadn't heard anything in a couple of weeks, and I don't know what their process is. I've never done this before. But I feel that, since I know, and I talked it over with a spiritual friend last night, in fact, long time, the holiest person I know besides my late spiritual da, who's passed away. And so this woman is a little bit younger than me, not much, but lifelong Catholic and just very holy and consistent, solid. And I haven't shared a lot about me, but she witnessed a lot and witnessed a lot of the persecutions and the different things that I went through in my hometown. And I know her children, her family, they're grown now, but and maybe it's only about once every 3 or 4 months we talk on the phone, but usually it's her calling, wanting prayer needs or to discuss things with one of her 8 children and their families or something. But this time I called her because I was becoming very distressed and confused, and so I did share with her this vision I'd had, dream vision, 12 years ago, that I do not want to be offending God or going against what God offered and wanted for me. Excuse me, I got something in my eye. But anyway, that was part of this ordeal I was going through, and the devil messing with me. But I had in the morning a needle procedure, needles put in up in this side, upper back around my spine, but up close to the neck. And somehow it affected my neck, the needles and things, and they used electrodes with it too to try to stimulate the muscles. And I will say my left arm is doing better. I wasn't awake lots in the night with arm pain and numbness and all in this arm and hand, but my neck, and it affected my equilibrium and my spatial orientation, being able to turn my head and keep balance and my headache was very bad because it was affecting my neck and head more than helping the arm and stuff. So, oh my. And just about as soon as I was getting really extra pain and suffering with my neck and head and from the needle treatment, the devil just moved right in on me. But the chancellor and everything, he got back with me as to who's in charge of this. I'll sort of walk you guys through this as a personal thing in case you all apply for a canonical approval by your bishop in your diocese. So I had written a letter of request that the chancellor, and he's chancellor and chancellor and canon lawyer, encouraged me to do. But like I say, I hadn't heard anything back and just was curious, wanting to know what the process was. So, I assumed that they would meet face to face with me, especially since I've been a hermit nearly 25 years and was living the canon law, living the requirements of it all that time. But But no, I think, well, for one thing, the person in charge is very busy right now. And because other obligations that are starting up now. But he talked about paperwork. And I don't have paperwork other than my request letter, which was just more or less a chronological type resume, but written out in prose writing, not bullet points. But pretty much the idea was bullet point of, and I didn't do my whole life. I did the years of my hermit life, my vows, and the ceremony with my spiritual father, and it was very private. And my rule of life, my vows, my evangelical counsels, and then on through. Well, I started really when I became Catholic, when I was confirmed, etc., and how God had brought me into the church. I interwove spiritual experiences with it, of how I became Catholic, and different things that happened. So spiritually, I didn't give the detail of a sign God gave me at my confirmation. I had a private confirmation, but that some people have left comments, how is it that you even stayed Catholic with all this that happened to you? But that sign that God gave me at my confirmation was very powerful and unusual. So it was what God knew in advance I would need a sign to keep me focused and willing to suffer and to take the hardships of how people were, and situations. And so but with this switching over to being a hermit by canon law, I'm trying to leave it in God's hands, obviously. But when the pain hit me and my got bad, my neck and my head and all, really the devil moved in on me, and I became concerned, and old concerns came up of and I don't want to displease God in that vision, what he offered and said and asked, but it's hard to discern, and I don't really know any priest here well enough to just cold do a walk-in and say, I have these experiences, and this is what I was told 12 years ago, and help me discern if it means that God wouldn't want me to be a canonical hermit. Because that's what he indicated then. The offer he made of me, of what he wanted, was that, I could have him. No, there's more to it. I might share it a little later in this video, but I don't know yet how much I want to share, because I have this other situation still going on, and but I do know the disorder, and I'm very empathic now. I'm not at all bothered by it. And I pray extra now for the person. Great compassion and empathy for her. So, and understand what she's dealing with more. But, and it doesn't bother me at all. It's just, I thought it strange, but now I understand what the problem is. So you just live with those things. People have ailments, have issues, and you learn to live with them, and you just ignore it. If I thought the person would open to it, I would express more, and maybe the person then would see and get some help with it. I don't know. But otherwise, you just, some things you can challenge, other things you can't. Like a sociopath, you would never challenge. They become enraged. So you just don't. But I am going to do more talks on different disorders, personality disorders, and illnesses, because it's good for us to be aware. We will understand people more, and we will not automatically just be in confusion. Well, what's wrong? Why are they acting this way? Why are they obsessed, or this or that or the other thing? And so we can understand people and learn how to help them in essence, or move on through and stay distant from them. Just pray for them and not get involved otherwise. I need some more aspirin here. I have this BC. It's awful tasting. It's very strong content and aspirin, NSAID. Comes in looks like a Band-Aid package, but it's a BC. You can get it on Amazon or in a drugstore. It's over the counter. Has caffeine in it too, so it's the only thing I have found to help a spinal headache. But it wasn't helping the spatial disorientation I was getting from my neck, from the needle treatment that the physical therapist gave me yesterday morning. And I'm still having those effects, but the headache is lessened enough that I can share and talk. But so yes, so I sent in this request, just email, to the chancellor. He's canon, lawyer, and chancellor. Very wonderful man, and I think I have to be careful not to pester him. And I've explained to him now, though, in an email, how something can get triggered in me. Something from the past of what I went through, especially in my hometown. That was just really traumatic for me. And also when the ecstasies began, and it was okay at first with them, but then people would start injuring me and were being angry and things like that. I talk about this in other videos further back, so I won't go into it, but the effects of it are still with me. I have forgiven it all. I have forgiven it. I even understand that God puts us through trials such as that, persecutions and humiliations and injuries and injustices. Like I had to pay for my shoulder surgeries just out of pocket using my parents' hard-earned money. Ironically, they wouldn't have been happy on this earth if they thought their own money was going through to, because it happened as a Catholic. So the ironies that occur in our spiritual lives, it's amazing. But God works it all out, and I know where my parents are now. They understand, but it was a trial that God wanted me to go through. Added suffering. The second shoulder surgery was extremely painful. A terrible surgery, slap tear surgery. Rugged recovery. But just happened because of the ecstasy, and that bishop had wanted me to, thought I could make it go away, and said if I didn't, he would know that I was faking it and just wanting attention and all this. And I prayed about it and decided, and a couple other people, I had a blog then, and a couple of Catholics said, you've got to obey your spiritual director. God will take care of you. Well, he did take care of me. God did. Thankfully, my mother had passed and I could pay for the surgeries. But not like I'm flush and I could sure use that money now, for example. 2 shoulder surgeries, and the one was a severe one, so it's costly. And just the suffering of it. But I understand on 2 ways, and you do too. Understand this: when you suffer, whether you're suffering all the time or if you're a temporary or secondary type suffering, and you're offering it to God, that you've made an offer to God of your suffering and of yourself. So for God to utilize however He wills. But that suffering will be utilized, and God, it's redemptive. It's redemptive suffering in that regard. But if you are in love with Christ and you are actively desirous, yearning for union with Christ, we have to understand what Christ goes through. If you're in love with someone and they're in love with you, the two you begin to learn all that the other has suffered in life, has gone through. You learn all about their lives, all about their persons, their experiences, their joys and their sorrows, their families, all of that. That's same with Christ. And so I had to suffer. And also, though, if we want union with God, we have to be purified. And part of the purification is dying to ourselves. And again, understanding what Christ endured. And what's the best way to understand and to be purified? It's the hard way, but it's through suffering. The love of suffering and the suffering to love. So the more we suffer, the more we're purified, the more we come to understand what Christ suffered, and the more we love Christ for suffering like that for us. To die to Himself, to suffer all He suffered, not just the crucifixion, but the daily crucifixions that He went through, with people after Him, people persecuting Him, people debating and arguing, putting Him down, not believing Him, disciples walking away from Him, leaving. When a lot of them left, when He said, I have come from heaven, and my body is true flesh, and my blood is true. My blood is true blood, and if you eat my body and eat my flesh and drink my blood, you will have true life in you, and eternal life, etc. So that went too far, and many of them left then. I think something like 75. Seems like I've heard that. I don't know if that's in Scripture or what, or if that's I don't know. Seems like I heard that, or it's in my mind. So, but don't take it as factual until you look it up or find out. But quite a few left, because He's crazy. This went too far. They thought that He went too far. Think how He felt with that. And He loved His mother. And He had to make it clear with His mother. When she came and wanted to talk to Him, wanted to get Him back safe to Nazareth, protected, brought some of His cousins and things, relatives, to help. And He wouldn't talk with her. He went to the door and said, Who is my mother? Who are my brothers? Who are my sisters? My mother and brothers are those who know the word, seek the word of God, and actively live it, or to that effect. And that took a lot for Him to say that, but He had to make clear. He was making His confession, giving us an example of who He chose. He chose God. He chose His mission to the Father. And He is the Son. He is God. But He taught us and lived these things and spoke these things. as a model for us of how we can follow him and do likewise. So with all the suffering and things, part of it is to die to ourselves, to the suffering of letting go of our children, or letting go of a career or something if we're called to something else, or also letting go of our work on earth and in our retirement years, realizing that our spiritual lives continue on, that we still have work to do, God's work to do, our mission for God, that can take prominence then, once our temporal, our earthly work is finished, when we've done our responsibilities, provided for our families and ourselves, and so yes. And a viewer she said she just turned 64 and was thinking, what could she do with herself? And pops this whole thing that we've learned of, we're spiritual beings, and we have missions from God. He has things for us to do all through our retirement years, our elderly years. Waste it not. Whatever sufferings, whatever prayers, whatever active works of mercy, volunteering, whatever. And also growing to know him. That's really our number one work, is to develop our love relationship with God, and so that we continually learn love and to be purified, so that we can become one in his love. And a lot of the purification comes through suffering. But as I've been saying, the devil moves in on us when we are in weakened states. And I even wondered and thought, but the devil does a good job. So last night I was starting to panic. What have I done? What have I done? Am I going to displease God? Now this may sound strange to you, and it probably did to this canon lawyer I corresponded with, the one that encouraged me to apply, send in my request a couple weeks ago, and for canonical approval. And I was just twisted and panicking that I was going to offend God by doing that if I were canonically approved. Even to the point where I thought, maybe I need to pull out. And then when the priest who is in charge of it, in charge of the going through he said he had my paperwork to review, and in a couple of weeks or so or more, he would call me then to discuss the request. Well, I knew my request was only like a page long, or page and a half, probably a page and a half. It would be in a letter, but it's an email, so I couldn't really tell. And which is short for me, I'm a writer. That's what I always dreamed of from 4 years or 3 years old on, was being a writer. When I first started reading Boxcar Children, or being read to, wanted to write books. So I suppose I should still be open to that. But whatever God wills, see, we die to these little dreams we have too. We let God decide and follow through then if he opens doors. That's how I ended up doing videos. It was a weird thing. And it's bearing fruit, I think, for me anyway. I've grown so much, and I've been healed a lot. Healed of bad things. But I realized yesterday and today that I still get triggered and need more healing, because I became panicked also when he talked about this paperwork. I thought, what paperwork? The request letter would take maybe an hour, 5 minutes to read through. And I had no other paperwork, or he wouldn't have had anything else that I knew of. And I did ask this man, but he didn't say if there was other. I wonder, do they keep files, or do they, because, and what triggered it was then I remembered back in the Midwest in that diocese when I was in this community of hermits of St. Bruno briefly and had written to the diocese. I did whatever this lady in England had said, and she was in a valid, founding a valid idea and trying it out. Her vicar general, I spoke with him long distance, and this was back in maybe 2001 or something. And but it was after I had already made my private vows. But my spiritual father thought that it would be good, worthwhile, because she had a very nice, like, training and different things that she'd thought through, lists of books to read, and it further enhanced what I was learning on my own as a privately professed hermit. So I had a postulancy and a novitiate and all that. But at a certain time I was to write to the bishop and ask and request what I had never even heard of was canonical approval. And they, unbeknownst to me though, people in my hometown, in the Catholic Church, the one where the priest had done his homilies against me when I was scapegoated from my soup kitchen. Not mine, it was the Virgin Mary's, but I did what she told me to do. And it grew by leaps and bounds, and the whole town was in on it and loved it. And then the priest, it got tricky, and my spiritual father said, "You're not going back for at least 2 weeks." And the priest did these homilies against me, lies, detraction and calumny, both. Calumny. That's, as I said the other day, when someone speaks or writes things that aren't true, but to put you down, to discredit, and for an evil purpose, really. He had people turned against me because he had become envious and resentful, thinking that I had all this power, and I did not. I had it all arranged as a pyramid type of a structure of broad base of many groups of people. And so there was no one person in charge. He didn't know that because he wasn't involved with it, other than to eat the soup and the dessert that we'd give him gratis. He needed a touch of love. That was the whole point. The Virgin Mary wanted it for anyone who needed a touch of love. But he really did not know the structure of it, or how it was very beautifully set up. The Virgin Mary knows what she's doing. She told me exactly, and to take the food out to the people, not to embarrass them by having them. How can they try to get in? We didn't have public transportation in that town then, and so so it all worked out beautifully. But I ended up scapegoated out because after my spiritual da found out that this priest had used his homilies, the Mass, to berate me from the pulpit instead of a sermon. And he said, "You're never going back, that's it. And you're not to ever speak to that priest until he apologizes." And I lived right across the street from the church. I'd gotten that house, in fact, to help so we could keep overload supplies, because the kitchen ladies, the devil was taking over them, and would lock up things. We didn't have any place to store things, so we'd use my house for storage, and people just run back and forth when we needed more supplies, or when we were done for the weekend, bring it back over. So and that's where we kept this big printer thing that I wrote a grant for and got it from a company, and Icon Company. Shout out to them. I don't know if they're still in business, but they liked what we were doing and gave us a good price, and then ended up I had grant money, and so just miracles were happening right and left. And that bothered the priest too. It makes people uneasy. Some people get very uneasy with things, supernatural. So anyway, that all came back to me. All this stuff had been flashing back, triggering PTSD stuff. But the diocese had started this behind my back investigation of me. And this priest told me, he finally told me that it'd been going on for a month or two already. And he told me what the other priest of the other parish had written about me, and how he had laughed and says, I'm even surprising myself because I can't stand her. And I wrote something positive because I think, her being a hermit is great, or something like that. And so this other priest told me, just gossiped that to further lay the bed of putting me down. And then he said that what would happen to me would be one of a couple of things. That with the investigation, that I would be excommunicated from the Catholic Church was one. And I was horrified because I knew what that was. And the other one, though, he says, well, they'll probably, more likely, just declare you anathema. I said, oh, what's anathema? What's anathema? And he said, oh, well, that's when it's announced publicly that you are anathema and no one is to speak to you or look at you even or have any dealings with you. And there was this wonderful Catholic man. I'd known him before I was Catholic. And he did my car work for me, and he was honest and good and a holy soul. I call him Saint Gregory because he's and I usually call him on September 3rd, which is the feast of Pope Saint Gregory the Great, and call him by the name I gave him because he is the most wonderful holy man with the most wonderful wife, and he's so fair to people. And car mechanics, especially single women, it's very easy to get taken advantage of. So, and I had been up until moving back to my hometown, and there he was, my cousin who's not Catholic, they said, oh, that's the one to go to, they go to him because he's so honest and good. And I thought he wouldn't help me anymore. Like, it was just overwhelming to me that I would be anathema because I had already gone through shunning from the priest's homilies 2 years prior. Because it took him 2 years to speak to me finally. He never apologized, but I figured speaking to me took a lot for him. And I forgave him. I'd forgiven him already. But I decided my spiritual dad would probably approve that I could speak to him then if he spoke to me, even though it wasn't an apology. And I even showed him the door that I refinished in the house. It's an old antique door. It's an old house. And I had done that as a prayer for that priest, a prayer offering. And it was very intricate, and it was heavily painted, and it took a lot to get it all refinished and all. So I showed him that, and I had scripted above it in Latin something about priests. You are a priest forever. In Latin, I forget what the word Latin is, and he really he just humbly said thank you, but he never apologized for anything. But there he was then, telling me that I was going to be called and declared anathema. And I love the church. I love Catholicism, and even though I've been brutalized, but I understand, that I understand the spiritual reasons that it's allowed, even though at times the human emotional hurt comes in and I get upset by it. And the PTSD effects are still real. I'm not fully healed, or I wouldn't have reacted the last couple of days. And being unwell with my headache so bad and my spatial disorientation, I haven't been able to do a thing but lay here. I get up, take the dogs out, but I have to be careful not to fall, and because everything seems weird because it affected my very bad neck. So we'll have to figure out with the physical therapist what to do instead. Maybe put the needles in my neck and try to help my neck. No, that's probably not a good idea at all. But anyway, so that's just some of the so I panicked. And also I thought, what kind of an investigation? All they had to do, because they had never heard of this community before, couldn't find out anything about it, although I'd said it was in England and gave the name of the woman and her diocese that was sponsoring it and the vicar general. And it was probably a couple of years later, or 3 years later maybe, that I got to know Reverend Monsignor at the diocese and the bishop. And I found out, well, that's why we had to have the investigation, because we didn't know anything about this and couldn't find out. And I said, well, why didn't you just pick up the phone and call? I said, that's what I did, because I wanted to make sure it was valid and that the woman was being truly sponsored by her diocese and everything was on the up and up. And sort of stared at me like, oh, didn't think of that. So they had this investigation of me behind my back, and that I thought, why not just pick up the phone and say, could you, or send me a letter, please arrive at such and such a time. My son would have driven me to the city. It's a half hour away, but I couldn't drive then because I didn't have any. It was too much pain for me to. I would have to lay down in the back seat or something, or put the front seat back. And he would drive me places if I ever went someplace like that. I could drive in town, short places, and that's how I am now, even with pain meds, because it's just my pain just so much worse now. But um, I just was just mind-boggling, and it was so upsetting to think that they wouldn't even tell me, just have me come in and talk to them about it. I could have told them, yes, I talked with the vicar general in England and this and that and the other thing, but no. And so that, I think that's tweaking me, that this paperwork he has to review, and it was only a letter, a request, and it's not anything face to face, at least not yet. And then he said he would call me to talk about it. Still no face to face. It just makes me really queasy. I can't describe how freaked out because of the effects of that other experience. So I did end up pulling out. I didn't want to risk I figured I wasn't going to be excommunicated. On what grounds could they? I couldn't think of anything. But the anathema, that was in a way worse for me because I'd already gone through shunning. Now, the Protestants never shunned me, but the Catholics had done because of those sermons he had. And so, and I didn't believe in just telling people what my spiritual father had ordered me to do. He had ordered me to not, that I wouldn't be going back there. I did let the people know, the top volunteers who were sort of the subgroup, managed the kitchen and all, and took over. And, I told them, they knew that my spiritual dad had directed me to that. And they didn't blame me either. But see, I would have preferred staying in it. And, just living with the persecutions and things, and the priests being angry and resentful that I was still there, but God wanted it otherwise. And I look back and realize my body couldn't have kept that up. It was a miracle I was able to do that. Those concrete floors, of the school kitchen, and the heavy, washing of the pots and pans and all. So It was quite something, though. I loved it. That was my happiest times, I think, of any of the projects that I did. And it was, the miracles were wonderful. Everybody, the both parishes joined together, and people from the community came. Even the college students came to help, and professors who, it was a very anti-Catholic college, and that it just really brought such ecumenism to the town. It was wonderful. But after those homilies, and the Protestants found out how I had been badmouthed, and they knew me from growing up, it caused more damage, more harm. So I just pray that it was probably best that I did leave then a few years, 3 years later. No, 4 years later, after my mother passed, or shortly before I moved out of there, because it was getting very, very difficult with the animosity and things, and the lies that had been said, and God doesn't want us, I understood what persecution was, but just to live in it constantly, once we experience it, you don't have to just stay in it. That's not love. That's not love. Not even love and respect for your own self. So, yeah, so I've been freaking out about this thing, and this canonical approval thing, and going over, I did share with my friend that vision, and I maybe have shared it in a video, but it was 12 years ago. It was a dream vision. But I don't know if it was the bishop at that time and this young woman that he had canonically approved, who was not at all ready to be a hermit and didn't make it, didn't last a year. And it was sad. She was really set up to fail in a way, but she wouldn't have anyway, because it was a romanticized view of wanting to be a hermit. She'd been to Russia with a family priest friend. He was on sabbatical or something. I think for a couple or 3 months they traveled around it. That's when she became familiar with the pilgrim prayer, the Jesus prayer, and by the Russian pilgrim hermit, and then the Russian Orthodox Church, and then she became familiar with Russian hermit tradition. And she then came back. We had a new bishop. It was his first bishopric, first assignment. Young. He'd had other positions, but this was his first as a bishop. He was replacing an elderly retired bishop, 80-year-old bishop, who obviously, hadn't been actively doing a lot of things, trying this or that. Didn't have the energy for it, and it was okay, We go with the flow with people. And but he within 3 months of arrival, canonically approved her in a mass reception, and now spread in the diocese paper, and she wore a habit, but he thought it was fine that she lived in her mom and dad's home, where she lived. She just graduated from college, hadn't worked at all yet, didn't really have any serious relationships, with dating, boyfriends or serious love interests, and so just lived at home. And they did have a garden shed. All this was in the article, and it was as if it hadn't even crossed their minds, the bishop's or hers, that solitude means solitude. And the whole point is not just rigidly, being in solitude, but you benefit. Hermits are an extreme of the spiritual life, in essence. The dying to self, the leaving the world, is a more of an actuality with a hermit, because there's spiritual cause and effect, and it's a more intense life. And it's intended to be that. They went out into the desert literally, or up into the mountains, and so in our time period, if we're older female or disabled or something, or disabled male, we can't fend for ourselves out far. If you're on medications, you can't risk, having someone burglar or steal or harm or anything like that, or rape. I was, how old was I? 49 when I became a hermit. So, just not safe. I was a sweet young thing compared to now, anyway. At the time, I felt ancient then. But yeah, so we have to adapt to our times, to our circumstances. But God provides. Like here, these neighbors aren't allowed to speak to me because he sexually harassed me. Old guy, but doesn't make any difference. How old or how young, I guess, or how gimpy the old lady is. But and then that one is very kind. She is the only one that really talks to me at all, but it's in passing, and she helps me if I'm ill, but she hasn't needed to for months now, not since December, early December. So so there isn't much contact there, unless I'm watering a tree for them now. They're gone. She texted me to ask if I do that every night. So that's about it. Nobody's behind. In front, one guy will say hi and wave, and the others will on occasion, but rarely see them out. Rarely that we're out at the same time. So it's just a different kind of situation. But I really am concerned that because God had said in that vision back when, I'm sorry, I got off topic there. Still not with it totally, with headache and stuff, and the disorientation, but I get off topic anyway. It's not an excuse. Probably would have anyway. So the whole situation is that God lifted me up in this dream vision to about a foot away from the rounded part of the church that was across that house that I lived in at the time. I didn't live at the time of this vision, but I had before. And this vision came 8 years after I'd moved away. So I hadn't lived there for 8 years, but it was set there, and lifted me up in the air to where it would be right behind where the tabernacle would be on the other side of the bricks. And I was shown through the bricks. I could see through the bricks. And also it was the same rounded area that I could see from my childhood home years before, like 50 years before even, and could see and was always fascinated with that rounded spire area. And after I became Catholic, that's when I realized my fascination was that's where the tabernacle was in there. And it drew me to that from our back windows. I would just gaze at that and tried to watercolor it and everything with the tree branches and through looking through a block or half a block away. So yes, up there, and then inside, behind them was the tabernacle, but to the left stood this bishop, this younger bishop. Then a huge exaggerated stack of canon laws. Well, there were actually just 2 volumes, but it's a huge stack. Then to the right was this young woman on a kneeler, but wearing a very coarse, exaggerated habit. Very coarse, and tears in it, holes in it, and this was in the vision. And her face had an exaggerated austerity and sorrow and tension of, they were both looking at this huge crucifix that was before them, bigger than life size, and Jesus on it. And it's not in that church, incidentally. It was in the vision, though. All this was really exaggerated of to make the point, to make an intense point. And it was very, very bloodied. And the young woman was reacting to that, with this extreme piety, overdone. And the bishop, I couldn't see his face because he was more face the back of his head and his mitre, and he didn't have the zucchetto on. He had his more formal, I think it's a mitre. And while I was being shown that scene, which I thought, well, but God said to me, "Why would you want that when you can have me more directly now?" And the peace and the love and the assurance just flowed through me. And it was like, what? It's not even a question. Of course, I want God directly. He was holding me up there and filling me, and the way he said it, "Why would you want that when you can have me more directly now?" It was soothing and peaceful and assuring. And there was just no question. And of course, I said, "Oh, of course. No, of course I want you." And from that point on, there was never any consideration of me for that until later when this woman kept writing on her thing, and I got thinking, well, maybe I'm supposed to, maybe I have to, because even back then I thought maybe this is really what you're supposed to do. But Reverend Monsignor reassured me, no, 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 you don't have to. But I think one other time I tested the waters, cast a net, and that was when the bishop was more busy with his retirement parties, said he didn't have time. And I was relieved then, but I cast the net because every now and then I would think maybe it's best to be in union with what the church has. But now I think so even more than that. Well, for a couple of reasons, and I've mentioned before, but one is I really have no other links with the church on earth, church militant, I guess it's called. No. Church militant, is that in purgatory? Anyway, the church on earth. I'm not in good shape to go. They have padded seats, padded pews, and sitting on that. And then also, unless ordered to, I would obey if the bishop said I had to go and see. But I don't want to have the ecstasy and have people injuring me or upset, or a priest upset by it or bothered. I know my stamina enough. I just don't want to go through it. It's counterproductive to others. I believe in a certain situation where I could become an occasion of sin to other people if I persist in something that's going to cause them to react in a sinful way, in an ugly way or a not good way, or even sort of a slap to God way. But I feel that I am truly like a desert mother, that out and away, I have my spiritual communion, I have my spiritual confession, I keep with the scriptures, the daily Mass readings and other scriptures. I am constantly researching things about God or the church, or reading catechism, this or that, and Bible, and um, reading about this or that saint, or uh, that's what I love doing and talking about. It's obvious, I think, I hope so. So, but I'm concerned that I might be offending God by requesting. The other reason is that it is becoming so known now, the Canon Law 603, that when I talked with this canon lawyer and chancellor, that was all he thought was canon law, and that's why he also wanted to encourage me to do that. Even though I did explain, well, there is still the private and more hidden form, although that mine could be hidden. See, that's his point, and he understood that then. When I said, nothing in, and he knows canon law, nothing in it says it has to be announced, or a public mass, or a public reception, or dressing up and standing out to people, being noticed and known, interviews, or your name out there, um, showing yourself at the parish daily. It would be easier if you didn't wear a habit and you didn't know. Going to the parish for mass, coming and going, would be ideal, totally ideal. But if you're known, you're no longer hidden, and then people are looking at you. It's a distraction to others. I just don't see it. I don't see how anyone started that or thought that was a good idea. It's not how, you could blend in, I guess. If you got, I think some students in Catholic schools and stuff will dress as a saint or as a religious for Halloween, but then everybody's dressing up. But otherwise, you're going to stand out. So, anyway, but I don't know if it's from that time period with that particular bishop, and the fact that the bishop didn't understand, or he understood, but was eager. I think he was eager to show that he was proactive and things were going to happen, that he was going to be a man of action and try things. So he immediately approved this young woman without really knowing her, and not thinking through, not having experience with even what Saint Charbel's superior wisely said about, hermits ought to be older, and for various reasons. I think I've talked about this in another video, but back to my issue and how the devil was twisting me so badly that I couldn't sleep much last night out of this fear and concern that I was insulting God by even thinking of doing that when I have him directly. And I have been. It's been great. My spiritual growth this last year especially has been wonderful, especially since you guys have helped me get really more plugged in and very enthused about all things church, spiritual life, anything of the scriptures, and I'm reading them now with my eyes opened further from a spiritual view, and picking up, making the connections more deeply of what Jesus is saying. I hope you are too. Understanding that we are spiritual beings, and the world is a spiritual world of this great oneness of the Spirit. It's all spiritual, but God utilizes temporal and tangible matter in this spiritual world and in our spiritual bodies. for this lifetime. And then we will be back to pure spirit again, spirit only. And Jesus' transfiguration, I understand, he was showing this is what we really look like. He was demonstrating to Peter, James, and John. The others wouldn't have gotten it, and they barely did. So, but they understood it probably far more later as they became more grasping of this, that they are spiritual also, and to start viewing and living to our spiritual capacity, which is boundless. And that's when Jesus can start really utilizing us, when we don't have these temporal, tangible boundaries that we are shackled to, where we understand the fullness of God's glory and of the power of the Spirit of love. His pure love is what Jesus showed in his spiritual nature. That's what pure love looks like. Light, energy, all of that. So to learn to love more, and so pray for me about this. I've asked you that before, but it was amazing how the devil really messed with my mind and got my body even. I lost appetite and prayed last night. I begged the Virgin Mary, the mother of Jesus, to please ask Jesus. I asked the favor if my spiritual dog could guide me, because I know in real life, based on what all I went through, he became protective. And he had this way, if he was upset by something or thinking not a good idea, he'd sort of cluck his tongue. And he had a very strong Irish brogue. He'd sort of put his head back and cluck his tongue. Oh, I don't know, But he'd always say, well, go ahead. Try it if you want, but go ahead, but And then later he'd say, well, that wasn't meant, was it? And so he'd probably say the same thing, but he did really try to instill in me to stay clear of the diocese messes and what became messes for me anyway, because he knew that they didn't know how to handle someone like me. They wanted to be in charge of the mystical ecstasies and figure it out, but they refused to read the book that the Holy Spirit had shown me to read, and that the bishop had promised he would read if I couldn't get rid of it by standing. Because I said, well, I'll do that, but then if it doesn't work, would you please read this? Because it would have enlightened him on what was happening with me and how it progresses. This Monsignor Albert Farge, in his book, Mystical Phenomenon. It's an old one, translated into English from the French in 1926, but it had all the answers that the Holy Spirit showed me, that binding in the name of it, and I got it and read it, and there it was, the answer. So I understood what was happening to me, because I was worried then the devil was doing it. So, but it all went awry, and see, time and again. And then I got exiled, basically, because Reverend Monsignor grew to really not want me to have that ecstasy, not want me in Mass. He didn't want me there. And he has an OCD issue, and I was out of order. He was very bothered that I wasn't standing during the gospel. I couldn't. You lose your faculty. So, see, it became an occasion of sin for him for me to even be there. So, but my spiritual Da wouldn't want that to happen again if he were here. Once you have that suffering of being run out of the temple, of having the people in the temple go against you, and I've experienced what Jesus felt like having that happen, and having to leave your own hometown. My spiritual dog pointed that out to me. He said, when they all turned on him, he walked through their midst, and he never went back to Nazareth the rest of his life. And I left, and now, I can't really travel well, so I doubt if I'll ever be back in my hometown until my body or my ashes are there at Mount Hope Cemetery. So, anyway, but by this afternoon, when this pain in the head thing started to lift, and when I realized the devil was working me over. So it's important when these things start learning to, if you don't already, most of you already do, learn to recognize what is causing the disturbance in you. Is it God that is just causing a disturbance to get your attention, to make a change, or to stop you from something, or is it the devil? And at this point, I'm starting to think this episode was the devil. Just to relax, let them do their process. I did write and say, that I do hope, especially with me being different, because the chancellor, I've been expressing things, and I had these flashbacks, and so I wrote, I'm having these flashbacks and stuff of what had happened to me. And the bishop had known before, that I'd had quite a time of it elsewhere. And, but he seems to be very spiritually focused himself. And I think but if you don't meet someone and they, my friend, that's why I called her. She says, anybody who would hear these things or read it would question and think, this is too bizarre. This person's life is too way out there. Too much unusual things and awful things for one person. So I did emphasize, be very, even out of kindness to me, to at least meet in person, to at least meet me. And that's the reason I wanted the bishop to, because I've not met him in person. And I think I would just rest easier because he's aware of these things when I wrote before. Because I wanted to know if he expected me to be canonically proven. He didn't. It turned out he didn't then. But I think if God wants, but I guess I just tell God, of course I want you, and I appreciate God. He's directly with me, and that wouldn't need to change. Why would that change in this diocese with a bishop who's more seasoned, and the bishop back there is seasoned now? He's not been doing that. He didn't do that again. He, had older people and better situations. With one, definitely seems to be a very outstanding hermit. So very hidden, and well, not totally hidden, but focused, and not living with a friend or anything like that. So benefiting from that abject silence and solitude, except I have someone making noise here. I have a dog here. But okay, well, think through things when you experience, and just do some analyzing. Pray for the wisdom of the Holy Spirit to help, and I guess just try to stay stabilized, which I was not. And I'm used to these kinds of things, but it still throws me. I'm not where St. John Vianney was by any means. The devil can still mess with me and get me riled. And does it when I'm not feeling well, when I'm in worse pain, how it happens. And because I had worked myself up into then thinking just pull the plug on this process and not risk offending God, that I was doing something that he showed me was, well, it is interesting though. I did get the very strong sense that God didn't see it as anything necessary. A canon law approval, a church law of validating a hermit. It's not a sacrament. God consecrates, humans don't consecrate. And a bishop maybe consecrates in the name of God, but the spiritual, the miracle of it, the action is God's action. And I felt that action when I had my vows, my beautiful ceremony, meaningful, between my spiritual dot and myself and God and heavenly witnesses. But so I was consecrated by God then. And I don't care if it's not technically consecrated in the name of the church or in the church or by the church or a bishop, because God would consecrate through the bishop anyway. In that regard, God consecrated me directly. What's wrong with that? Why discount God's power and might, his holiness? He's first in my life, and I did tell God last night. I told him, I said, I always want you. You are always above all else. And that includes God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit, then the church. The church is not the same as the Trinity. I might read more about the church and its relationship with God. The church is God's church, Christ's church. Christ instituted the church. But there's a distinction there. And if some people want to write or speak or talk about making the church as if it's God, it's going too far to try to prove a point or to try to make a point, not prove anything, but to make a point in order to make their case seem more powerful. But I trust God first, and especially if it's been discerned, and my spiritual father back then discerned that vision with me in addition. And it's held true all along, except for I don't know if God would truly be offended. I don't think he would, because it is his church. But it's going to a different level. It's not as if it's going to be any big step up, other than the action of being in union with the body of Christ and those persons who are hermits within the body, which already are hermits who are in the body, though. See, just not legally. And I don't know if God really is that keen on a church law created by humankind, devised and written, good as it is. It's beautifully written. I've been living it all along myself without being canonically approved. But it is but not legal. I'm not legalized. I didn't give my vows to the bishop. I gave them to God. But any bishop who is spirit, like this bishop here, was fine with that. He knows his place. He's a representative, but he's well. Lovey needs. I'll stop. But so anyway, it's an interesting thing though how easily still, at least to me, I guess it could be worse, but that the devil will just mess with me, and it takes a bit for me to figure it out. And by late last night, I was realizing I was being toyed with, like a cat with a mouse. God bless His real presence in us, and feel free to share anything that you have experienced with learning about the tricks of the devil. And also pray for me, please, that I will not go against anything with God. His will first and always.